Hello, everybody. I wanted to go over the Gospel of Matthew, teach a little bit about it and why Matthew wrote his Gospel of Jesus the way he did. He wrote it this way for a reason, so that we're going to break it down. Right, the Gospel of Matthew. Matthew is writing directly, specifically to the Jews. And he starts off with the genealogy, which leads to Joseph, which was not his father, but raised him as a father, right? And as a son. And it says, he clearly defines this, and he says that then Joseph, being aroused from a sleep, did as the angel of the Lord commanded him, and took his wife, and did not know her until she had brought forth her first son, and his name is Jesus. So he clearly says he didn't. That's not his child. He didn't know her, right? And that's how they said it. So we get to the genealogy, right? And the reason why he starts with the genealogy is because he's speaking directly to the Jews, right? He's speaking directly to the Jews, and there's a big reason why he's writing this, and one of the reasons is is to show them that he's the descendant of King David, right? Through Mary, which Luke in chapter 3 talks about. That's through the bloodline of a Jew woman, right? In the womb of a Jew woman. That's why when you get the Chronicles of Kings, it always says their mom's name out of nowhere. It's to show you that he is a rightful heir, a king of the Jews. You had to be a pure blood Jew to be king of the Jews, and this is why they didn't like Herod, King Herod. He was not a pure Jew. He was only put there by the Romans. And he was always trying to appease the Jews. And we'll get that in the book of Acts when his sons start attacking the Christians to please the Jews. And they killed James, and they locked up Peter, and they held him over for Passover because he didn't want to offend the Jews. They were always trying to appease the Jews because they knew that the Jews looked at them as not Jewish and not kings over them because they were not Jews. And they were always trying to prove themselves as Jews. And that's why when you get in the book of Acts, you see that happen. It says he stretched out his hands against James and killed them and arrested Peter. And he seemed to appease the Jews, so he held them over to Passover. And you'll see why he's trying to make them like him. And this is why it's so important that Matthew is pointing this out. Because Herod, the first father, the main one, is alive, and he's running it. And he's like, this is the rightful king of the Jews. His mom's Mary, and through the brothel to Joseph, who's King David and King Solomon in the bloodline to Joseph, and the union, right, makes him heir, firstborn heir to the King David throne, which is promised in 2 Samuel 7. 2 Samuel 7. Right, an heir to reign on your throne forever. So that's why it starts off genealogy. He's showing the Jews this is who he is. He's not only a Jew, he's the king of the Jews, right? So that's Matthew 1 through 17. Chapter 1 through 17 is the genealogy, right? Then you get to Matthew chapter 1, starting at 18, and it goes all the way in the second chapter to 23. It's called the record of origin. The record of origin is everything that happened in his birth and him being the killing of the children, right? And then them going to Egypt, the angel saying go to Egypt, right? And then so we get to the record of origin, right? And it says from Egypt I call out my son. Why is this important? Matthew is pointing this out. Why? Because he's trying to show us a parallel prophecy. Israel in the gospel of in the prophet Hosea says, Israel, my child, I call you out of Egypt, right? And here in the book of Matthew, the gospel of Matthew, he says, as a prophet says, out of Egypt I call out my son. He's saying it's a parallel prophecy, right? Calling out Egypt was a foreshadowing of calling out the son, Jesus Christ. And so he's pointing this out to the Jews. So he doesn't really explain this, right? Because he's speaking directly to the Jews. They know what he's saying. They know exactly what he's saying, right? So Matthew, you got to understand that Matthew was a tax collector for the Romans. So he had to be smart. He had to know multiple languages. He had to know Latin, Roman. He had to know Aramaic, his own language, and he had to know Greek, all the main territories that the Romans taxed. He had to know their customs. He couldn't be disrespectful. He's a businessman. Whether the Jews liked him, which they didn't because they felt he was a traitor, or not, he still had to respect their customs, and they had to respect him too because he was the Romans' authority was upon him, right? So, but at the same time, businessman still respects the customer, right? So, if you go in their house, he would know how to, or go to their business, he would know how to, whether it's shaking hands or they kiss on the cheek, whatever it is, I don't know. But he had to know it. He had to know the religion. He had to know their language. He had to know to write it, right? He had to keep. He was an accountant. He was a tax collector. He had to keep track of the money. So he was very smart and very educated. Why is that important? It's because when he wrote the gospel, it was written in Greek. However, when we get to Matthew 5:22. Right, we'll see right here. It says, "But I say to you that whoever is angry with his brother without a cause shall be in danger of judgment, and whoever says to his brother, Raka, shall be in danger of the council. But whoever says, you fool, shall be in danger of hellfire." What's Raka? Well, see, in the New King James Version or the Old King James, it's written in Aramaic, and when the original scrolls he wrote in Greek and put that in Aramaic, Raka. Why didn't he explain what it means? Well, because he's speaking to the Jews, and at that time Greek language was taking over, but they still held on to their words. So he threw Raka, so he's speaking to the Jews. They know what it means. It means to be empty-headed, like dumb. If you get other transliterations like New Living Translation, they don't have Raka. They already explain what it means. Right, and so, but the original language, the English, they put it the way they put it in Greek. Instead, they put it in English and put Aramaic. And the original writing, they put it in Greek and Aramaic. And they're showing you that what Matthew was showing the people, right? You had to understand, you had to study that. So it's an Aramaic word. So why do you put Aramaic without explanation? It's because he's speaking to the Jews. And so we had to see it through the eyes of a Jew to understand what he's trying to get across of who Jesus is, right? Here's another one. We're going to talk about Matthew 15. This is where he talks about customs, right? And he's speaking on Jewish customs. Then the scribes and the Pharisees who were from Jerusalem came to Jesus, saying, "Why do your disciples transgress the traditions of the elders? For they do not wash their hands when they eat bread." He answered and said to them, "Why do you also transgress the commandments of God? Because of your traditions. For God commanded, saying, honor your father and your mother, and he who cursed father and mother, let him be put to death. You say, whoever says his father or mother, whatever profits you, you might receive from me is a gift from God. Then he need not honor his father or mother. Thus you have made the commandments of God of no effect by your traditions. Hypocrites, well, did Isaiah prophesy about you, saying, these people draw near to me with their mouths and honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me, and in vain they worship me, teaching us doctrine of commandments of men. What is he talking about? See, he's speaking on the customs of Jews, but he doesn't really explain what does that truly mean, right? And why is it wrong? And so we get to Mark. And the reason Mark is written, he was the first one to write the gospel. Matthew seen it, and he expounds on it. It's why there's more chapters in Matthew. He was there. Mark wasn't there. He's getting his stuff from Peter, and he was a bystander. Like, sometimes he might have seen Jesus, but the point is that most of the encounters he was not there. He got his first-hand knowledge from Peter, and he is a Hellenist Jew, and he is speaking to Romans, or the Gentiles. And you'll notice this. Why? Because you can compare them. Why? That's why they know that Matthew was written after Mark, because he's not explaining the customs. He's just straight to the Jews. And Mark was written first because he's explaining the custom to the Romans or the Greeks or whoever that ain't basic Gentiles, right? So he's going to talk about the same issue, but he's going to explain it, right? He's going to explain exactly what these are. When the Pharisees and some of the scribes came to him, coming from Jerusalem, now they saw some of his disciples eating bread with defiled bread with defiled, that is, with unwashed hands. They found fault, for the Pharisees and the Jews do not eat unless they wash their hands in a special way. Ready? See how he's explaining it's a special way. Holding traditions of the elders. When they come from the marketplace, they do not eat unless they wash, and there are many other things which they have received and hold, like washing of cups, pitchers, and copper vessels, and couches. Right? So they do it a certain, but it's not just their hands. It's not just their hands. They do the cups, and if they don't do it, they're considered defiled. These are traditions that they said Moses created with that Moses got an oral law from God. So these are traditions for man. It was not written by scripture. It was not scripture. It was not written by the finger of God and the commandments, but it was oral. So they held it, right? So Matthew is explaining the washing. It's not just their hands. It's also the cups, and they do it a special way, right? So here we go. Then the Pharisees and scribes asked him, why do your disciples not walk according to traditions and elders, but eat bread with unwashed hands? And he said to them, well, did Isaiah prophesy of you hypocrites, that it is written, these people honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. In vain they worship me, teaching as doctrines of the commandments of man. For laying aside the commandments of God, you hold traditions of men, the washing of pitchers and cups, many other things you do. He said to them, all too well you reject the commandments of God, that you may keep traditions. For Moses said, honor your father and mother. Now here we go with the other one, right? This is the honoring. This is the fifth commandment. Honor thy father and mother. The only one that comes with the promise. It should live long, right? So here we go. Honor your father and mother. And he who curses father and mother, let him be put to death. But you say, if a man says to his father or mother, whatever profits you might receive from me is a koban, right? And so it says that is a gift of God, right? So see, Matthew just said gift of God. Right here he says the actual word koban, and then said that's what the tradition. Now you can understand that they had that he used Aramaic, and he's explaining it. It's a gift from God, right? Then you no longer let him do anything for his father or his mother, making the words of God no effect. Through your traditions you have handed down, and many such things you do. Why is this important? This is why it's important. Now that you understand the traditions, the koban, what Matthew is talking about, not honoring the father and mother, and Matthew and Mark is explaining it more, right? He said koban. That's the name. It's an Arabic word. So that's the gift of God. And what he's explaining is, so when we are raised by our mother and father, they spend money to raise us, and then we get our wives and we leave the house. And then they get old age, they can't take care of themselves. We are to save money and take care of them and honor them back for raising us, right? But the Pharisees said they made an oral law saying you could say it's koban, you can give it as a gift to God, and you don't have to give it to your parents. You could put it for God in the temple. And who was running the temples? The Pharisees, right? This is the corruption that was happening. This is why Jesus knocked over the tables. They were also the ones, their families were selling the doves. So who was getting the money? The Pharisees. So they made a tradition to rob their family, say that it was for God, and they would pocket the money themselves. And this is why Jesus knew. He knew, like, I know what you're doing. This is not of God. You can't. God says honor thy father and mother. He didn't say give it to me, right? And this is where we start twisting scriptures. And let me tell you, there's a lot of churches right now that are doing that, right? They're the Pharisees in the church. Why do you think that the Vatican is so rich, right? They're the richest country in the world. How? There's people starving. That's your man of God. Here we go. So this is why Matthew wrote his gospel, and this is why it's written. I should say this is why not why he wrote it, but this is why it is written the way it's written. He's going in order to show us the first genealogy, then the origin. And Mark is explaining to the Gentiles the traditions, right? And get straight to the point who he is, the prophet, the Messiah, all that, the miracles. Hope you got something out of that.